was, I mentioned last week that I've been doing a lot of study into, prepping for what my channel is going to be Halloween content wise, which I'm going to start hopefully this week. I've been really, delving, looking up my old notes and writing some new notes and really delving into the study of Frankenstein and Dracula. I might get into Werewolf of Paris if I have time because I'm just having so much fun doing it. But I really wanted to go a lot deeper in terms of the scholarship on the original books, but also their influence and presence in culture since then. I really wanted to go a lot deeper into that this year on my channel than I have in previous years. So I've been doing a lot of study, and I started with Frankenstein, and I was reading, studying up, digging out my old notes from grad school and everything, and just really delving into it more, making a lot of new notes. So I think you've ever seen my big notebook that I've got now. And if you don't know much about Frankenstein or the text, there were some. Mary Shelley made a lot of revisions to the text after even she put it out and published it. It's come down to kind of two main versions or main editions. If you look into the textuality of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or A Modern Prometheus, as the tagline was originally, she put out the first version in, I think it was, numbers 1818. Okay. That was her first published edition. And then by 1831, Percy had passed on then, and this was her last edition that she revised it up. And for a long time, people generally accepted the 1831 edition, the most recent one, as that was the standard definition. That was the go-to edition because that was the one that she had, had the most time to work on and had the most time to revise and really, polish it up. And thematically, it works better. There are all these reasons why 1831's edition is just the superior edition, still by Mary Shelley. But then you have these people, primarily in the late 20th century and recently, who are trying to argue that no, the 1818 edition, that one needs to be the best one. That one's the one that we should all stick to. And the reason is because ideology. So I'll explain this, and then I'll get back to the Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and show you how this is coming to fruition here. When it comes to academic critical theory, so academic scholarship about the humanities, the study of literature or art, that kind of stuff, or film or whatever. There's no such thing as higher studies in literature studies or film studies or whatever in the colleges today. There's not. I loved literature. I wanted to be a PhD in literature just because I wanted to study at the highest level I could literature that I love so much. I wanted to delve into it, to learn more about it, and I went into a master's program in English, and I got my master's. I completed my master's program. But one of the things I learned in that master's program is that there's no such thing. Even in the master's program, I was having to fight and do all of this, work on my own to really kind of study the literature. Because what higher academia, what higher studies do today when it comes to the humanities is they don't study the literature. They don't study the art or the film or whatever. They don't care about that. All they care about is a political agenda. And the literature, the art, the film, any of that is there only to be a tool to further a political agenda. That's what the history of scholarship, academic scholarship is. Once, the first thing you do when you come into like a, for example, a literature, master's or master's / PhD program or whatever, the first thing you do is they teach you the history of scholarship, the history of critical theory. And they lament the old days in which, in the 40s and, they were just studying, the lives of the authors and the context of the book and, the things they were trying to say in the book. And that's just so like, are you kidding me? That's what scholarship should be. And so they say, literary theory was or critical theory was eventually developed. And the first critical theories are useful, right? Reader response, for example. Let's not just focus totally on what the author wanted to say. Let's look at what readers get from the work, because that's more prominent in culture than necessarily just what the author wanted to say at any given time. And then there, what I really liked was psychoanalytic theory that developed, which came out of like Freud and Jung. And it wasn't so much, the trying to be the practice of Freudian or Jungian actual psychoanalysis, but it was taking a lot of the themes and the approaches of psychoanalysis and applying it to literature. As Freud and Jung both did when they were developing their, looking at mythology and so forth. And this is where the hero's journey comes from. It's this tradition, because Joseph Campbell was a student of Jung and so on. And that's an incredibly useful, theory, critical theory, if you want. But modern day academics hate that. Oh, you're a psychoanalyst. Oh, no one's going to take you seriously. If you want to be taken seriously in modern academia, you have to be, and you have to really like subscribe to one of these theories. You have to legitimately just like wholeheartedly sink your teeth in and be an acolyte of one of these theories. Primarily, it's going to be feminist theory, or maybe you can say gender studies if you want to try and. But there's a fight right there still raging on between feminist theorists and queer theorists who want to kind of blend or just make it gender studies in general. The feminists are like, no, you pay attention to the women, and stuff. So there's that. There's Marxist theory, which is exactly what you think it is. There's post-colonial theory, which is very tied into Marxist theory, but it's the idea of, oh, America's so evil, Britain's so evil, look at what they did to these, countries and so forth. And these are the theories out there. If you're not writing and publishing and studying literature according to one of these theories, you don't get a job. You just don't, you don't work, because that's what higher academia and literature and art and so forth is all about. It's all about using it as a tool to further their political agenda. There's no such thing as actually truly scholarly studying the literature at a higher academic level anymore. That just doesn't happen. And I saw that and knew that was the case. And I was like, well, crap, what do I do? Because I wanted to study literature more. I wanted to teach literature, and I eventually decided after my master's in English to go get an MFA, Master's of Fine Arts in creative writing, which is the highest, it's a terminal degree in the creative writing, the study of how to write creatively. There's PhDs in writing, but they're more, again, into the ideology, and they're not so much about teaching you or trying to write creatively. It's like, let's look at the creative writing. It's a different, it's a slight, but important distinction. So I did the MFA in creative writing, and that's, I started teaching from there. Now I'm going to give you an example here. Like, let's go back to the Mary Shelley's editions, like I said, okay? The 1818 edition, all of the feminist theorists, all of these people now are trying to say that, oh, that earlier edition, that's the one that we should be going to. That's so much, that's pure and whatnot. And I want to show you their reasoning. This is going over and over again. This is a page from Arizona State University. Okay, so this is just a little blurb about editions. In total, there are 5 significant versions. She does various different revisions, but again, we boil that down to the 1818 or the 1831. Theme in the 1818 edition, the earlier one, humans have free will, and there's hope for loving, egalitarian family unit. The 1831 edition the later edition, that relegates human action to fate, and the egalitarian family unit is significantly undercut. Why? Possibly biographical explanation, blah, 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 blah. All right, here are the actual changes. So that's a bunch of fluffy talk. Let's find out the actual changes in the edition. For one, I won't read the top ones there. The top ones are about, Victor Frankenstein talks about fate and how it was like fate driving him to the study and to the, studies that have him create the monster. And the feminist theorists don't like that, because that lessens the culpability of this evil man, who's mistreating, a woman, and some various reasons they don't like that. And we'll come back to that in a second. And the second reason is that Elizabeth, Victor Frankenstein's love interest, in the earliest edition, in the 1818 edition, she was his cousin that they adopted when the two were children. And, and then he eventually marries her. And that's obviously weird to us, but even back then it was, marrying cousins. That was kind of it was done, it wasn't, as scandalous it is today. Well, by 1831, Mary Shelley changed that, and Elizabeth wasn't his cousin. She was an adopted orphan that his family found, and they brought her in, and raised her and stuff. So her and Victor, raised together, and eventually they want to get married. Not, blood relation at the very least. But that's not so much what they don't like about it. What they don't like about it is this little addition right here. This is the addition to the 1831. The addition to the 1831 edition. On the evening previous to her being brought to my home, my mother had said playfully, "I have a pretty present for you, my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it." And when on the morrow she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally and looked upon Elizabeth as mine, mine to protect, love, and cherish. All praises bestowed on her are received as made to a possession of my own. Now you can just see how that's going to get feminist theorist panties all in a twist. And this is what this scholar says. This Elizabeth Lavenza scholar. In the 1818 edition, Elizabeth is a blood cousin adopted by Caroline. She is educated with Victor, and she is empowered enough to criticize her uncle's plans for Ernest and denounce the vengeful retribution of law courts. In the 1831 edition, Elizabeth is an orphan who becomes a prototype of the Victorian angel in the house. In the 1831 edition, her voice against the patriarchy is silenced. She also becomes the property of Victor. Now, that reason right there, that might be a reason for you personally to prefer the 1831 edition or over the 1818 edition. Quite honestly, it's a reason for me to prefer the last edition and not. But that's personal preference. That's 100% personal preference, and it's being presented here as though this is reason to curb and influence our academic study. This woman, this Elizabeth Lavenza here, she doesn't like that Elizabeth wasn't given more agency and blah, blah, blah. The writer didn't write her book here the way I want her to write it, the way I want the world to be. Therefore, we need to turn our back on that edition and go look at this one edition. This is absurd reasoning. And this is the reasoning you're going to get more from women scholars, just to be honest and quite blatantly honest, than you will from male scholars, although there are plenty of male feminists, who have traded in their nuts for, and brains for this ideology. But if you wanted to make the argument that we should accept the earlier edition over the later edition, and if you wanted to use this little blurb right here, this little difference in how Elizabeth's treated in the book, then you would actually have to reason. You would have to say, okay, this doesn't really fit the themes of the book as well. This doesn't really, give me some reasons that are 100% exclusive to the work itself and not to your worldview, not to your social agenda. And that's what feminist theory is. That's why feminist theory is the most basic, plateaued, like level 1 way of thinking about everything. And it tries so hard to pretend it's not. It tries so, feminist critical theory tries so hard to, put on a little show for you and pretend that they've gone so much deeper into things, but they haven't. Everything a feminist theorist does is to look at a work and say, is that fair to women? How can we use that for the feminist agenda? That's all they do. This is all a Marxist theorist does. This is all that any of them do. And they would just, how dare you say that? But it's true. They've got nothing to show for it otherwise. And again, it's an example of the ideology, how ideology comes in, short circuits any intelligence, short circuits any smarts you have, any talent you have, and you just have to look at everything you have, and this has to be a tool to further this ideology, and this has to be a tool, and that has to be a tool. Let's just make everything further the ideology. It's, I mean, we talk about it all the time, but I wanted to give some actual examples there because it is just, it's pathetic. And it's one of the things we see, I would argue, and I'm not saying it's the only reason, but one of the reasons I think Trump won the first time, and one of the reasons why it's looking pretty good for him now, is because people are tired of being force-fed this narrative from the mainstream media, because the narrative is set up to further their agenda. And I wish in academia we saw more people rejecting this force-fed, nonsense of these critical theories, feminist theory, so forth and so on, because it's stymied any intellectual endeavors. It's absurd how, I would like, why waste your time going to a literary academic convention or conference or whatever? All this is gonna be a bunch of crap. It's gonna be a bunch of people, like a bunch of hippies, trying to talk about why the world should be like that. Okay, cool story. Now tell me about the literature, and don't tell me about how the literature can be used to or criticized, for your agenda. And I make a point in my class not to, I don't tell them what to think. I have to tell them at the beginning of the class, look, my job is not to tell you what to think. as a writing teacher, in the classes where I'm just teaching them college level writing, I'm just here to help you better express what you think, better think it through yourself and better express it. I'm not here to try to aim you towards the right think, which every other professor is doing. I remember, I've told the story before, talking to another professor I shared an office with, and I was like, she was talking about this documentary that she shows them, and we watch King Corn and we watch all this. And I said, well, don't you think though that you shouldn't really try to influence them? I mean, you should let them think for just that. And the woman was like, no, we need to make sure they're thinking the right things. And that is 100% the philosophy of higher academia, or especially any college, to be honest. You'll find different editions out there. Most of them will say in the introduction, there'll be a note on the text or something like that, especially if it's a critical edition. But I guess you might find like a Barnes and Noble classic or whatever that you can't quite tell. But you just go thumb through. A good way to tell, go thumb through and find the area where he starts talking about Elizabeth. He's telling the story of his childhood, and as soon as he introduces Elizabeth, if she's the child of his sister who passed away, if she's the child of his father's sister who passed away, then you've got the earlier version. If she's an orphan that her parents die and her mother finds her and they adopt, you have what I consider the better edition. And the reason I say it's a better edition isn't just because, haha, it's got something feminist hate in it. No, I do think it's it's a little less cringy, that she's an orphan that he gets married to and not his actual cousin. But thematically, it works so much better. The idea of Victor being controlled by fate. See, Mary Shelley was heavily influenced, and this is something the feminist theorists also don't like, heavily influenced by Percy. I mean, Victor Frankenstein is based on Percy Shelley in a lot of ways. There's a little bit of Lord Byron in him. And in a lot of ways, it's her working out her guilt of her complicity with Shelley, because they just, they used up people left and right, particularly Shelley did in their life, and brought all kinds of pain in their aesthetic, romantic, mission to bring revolution to the world or whatever nonsense they were doing, and feminist theorists don't like that. They want to raise up Mary Shelley as their totem, look, a woman author, wrote one of the most influential, blah, 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 and anything, any way that Percy might have had an influence on the work, they want to distance themselves from. No, we'll do the earliest edition because then Percy might not have been able to suggest so many edits and so forth. But those edits that are made make it a better book, make it a tighter book thematically. It makes sense that Victor would be, would think anyway that he's ruled by fate. And also in that blurb that I had there, where he's talking about, he's first of all, it's Victor's perspective. It's not a third person omniscient narrator dealing out truth of the universe. No, it's a character giving account of their life. So it's narrative perspective. So you're free to disagree with that or find it suspect or whatever, anything they say. And then he's talking about when he was a child. And he even says, as a child with childlike seriousness, I misinterpreted my mother. I mean, that's implied. He says he took her literally when she said, I brought a gift for you. So as a child, he thinks of her as his, and what does he say? Not his to dominate, although Percy certainly dominated his sisters in some pretty sadistic ways. But in that blurb anyway, it's mine to protect, to love, to cherish, Oh, that sounds too much like a traditional marriage vow. It's just,